Picture this scenario. A 17-year-old girl named Riley sits alone in the cafeteria corner, her worn backpack clutched protectively against her chest. Inside that bag lies her most treasured possession, 3 bronze medals from her grandmothers. Underground fighting days in the 1980s, a legacy of strength she's never dared to claim. When the most ruthless bullies at Riverside High decide to humiliate her by destroying that backpack in front of the entire school, they have no idea they're about to awaken a sleeping dragon. Riley Chen isn't just some quiet girl who works at her family's restaurant after school. She's been training in secret at Phoenix Elite MMA Gym for 3 years, and her fists carry the fury of generations. What happens next will shatter their world and expose an underground fighting circuit that's been hiding in plain sight throughout Clearwater, Arizona. This is a story of hidden power, family honor, and the moment when silence transforms into unstoppable force. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Riley Chen had perfected the art of being invisible. As she walked through the sprawling corridors of Riverside High School each morning, her petite frame seemed to dissolve into the chaos of slamming lockers and rushing students. Her long black hair hung like a curtain around her face, and her oversized hoodie swallowed her small build, making her appear even younger than her 17 years. Most students at Riverside High had no idea she existed, which was exactly how Riley preferred it. The backpack slung over her shoulder wasn't just any ordinary school bag. It was a faded navy blue canvas pack that had belonged to her late grandmother, Lin Chen, a woman whose stories had shaped Riley's childhood. Inside, carefully wrapped in silk cloth and hidden beneath textbooks and homework assignments, were 3 bronze medals from underground martial arts tournaments in the 1980s. These weren't official competitions, but secret gatherings where women, like her grandmother, fought for respect, money, and survival in a world that tried to make them invisible. Lin Chen had been a legend in Clearwater's underground fighting scene before she met Riley's grandfather and channeled her warrior spirit into building the family restaurant business. She'd passed away when Riley was 14, but not before teaching her granddaughter the fundamental truth that strength comes not from size or loudness, but from discipline, heart, and the willingness to stand up when it matters most. Those medals represented more than victories in some forgotten tournaments. They were proof that Chen women carried fire in their blood, even when the world couldn't see the flames. Every morning, Riley would touch the hidden medals through the fabric of her backpack, drawing strength from their weight against her spine as she navigated the social minefield of high school. At Riverside High, a massive suburban campus that housed over 2,000 students, the social hierarchy was as rigid as ancient caste systems. The popular kids ruled from their thrones in the main hallway, while students like Riley existed in the shadows, grateful to avoid their attention. Riley's family owned Golden Dragon Restaurant in downtown Clearwater, a modest establishment that had been serving the community for over 20 years. Every day after school, she would rush from her last class to help her parents, chopping vegetables, taking orders, and cleaning tables until closing time. The work was hard, but it kept her grounded and connected to her heritage. Her parents, David and Susan Chen, had immigrated from Taiwan with nothing but determination and Lin Chen's fighting spirit flowing through their veins. They'd built their American dream one dish at a time, teaching Riley that success came through hard work and perseverance. What Riley's parents didn't know was that for the past 3 years, she'd been using her lunch periods and early morning hours to train at Phoenix Elite MMA Gym, a gritty facility on the outskirts of town where serious fighters came to test their limits. Coach Alina Vasquez, a former professional fighter turned trainer, had taken Riley under her wing after watching her demolish a heavy bag with perfect technique during a trial session. Alina saw something special in the quiet teenager, a raw Talent combined with an almost supernatural focus that reminded her of the greatest fighter she'd ever trained. Riley's training sessions were her secret sanctuary. In the gym, surrounded by the sounds of gloves hitting pads and the smell of determination mixed with sweat, she transformed from invisible high school student into a precision fighting machine. She'd earned her way up from basic classes to advanced MMA training, mastering everything from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to Muay Thai striking. Coach Alina often said that Riley fought like someone who had generations of warriors flowing through her DNA. And she wasn't wrong. The contradiction between Riley's two worlds created a constant tension in her life. At school, she was the girl who sat alone at lunch, reading books and avoiding eye contact. Teachers barely noticed her, except for Mrs. Patterson in English class, who sometimes caught glimpses of the fire that burned beneath Riley's quiet exterior through her powerful essay writing. Her classmates saw her as just another face in the crowd, someone who worked at a restaurant and probably couldn't afford the designer clothes and expensive gadgets that defined social status at Riverside High. But in the gym, Riley was becoming something extraordinary. She'd started competing in amateur tournaments under Elena's guidance, always traveling to neighboring cities where no one from school would recognize her. Her record was impressive, 12 wins and only 2 losses, with most of her victories coming by way of technical knockout or submission. Elena had started talking about turning professional, about scholarships to universities with strong combat sports programs, about a future where Riley's fighting skills could open doors to opportunities her family had never imagined possible. The weight of living these parallel lives pressed down on Riley's shoulders every day. She carried her grandmother's medals not just as inspiration, but as a reminder that strength sometimes meant staying hidden until the moment was right to reveal yourself. Chen had taught her that patience was a warrior's greatest weapon. That knowing when to strike was more important than how hard you could hit. Riley had been patient for 17 years, building her skills in silence while the world underestimated her completely. As she settled into her first period chemistry class, adjusting her backpack carefully to protect the precious metals inside, Riley had no idea that her two worlds were about to collide in the most explosive way possible. The first bell of Riverside High rang out across the campus like a warning shot, sending 2,000 students scrambling toward their designated classrooms. Chen moved through the chaos with practiced efficiency, her head down and her worn backpack pressed firmly against her spine. The hallways of Riverside High were a universe unto themselves, with their own laws, customs, and unforgiving social geography that had been mapped out over decades of teenage drama and hierarchy. At the center of this social solar system sat Madison Brooks, 17 years old and absolutely convinced that the world revolved around her, perfectly highlighted blonde hair and designer wardrobe. Madison commanded attention wherever she went, not just because of her family's wealth or her undeniable beauty, but because she possessed something far more dangerous than either of those advantages. She had the ability to destroy someone's reputation with a single social media post, to turn friends into enemies with a whispered rumor, and to make life absolutely miserable for anyone who dared to cross her path. Madison's domain was the main hallway intersection near the administrative offices, a prime location where she could see and be seen by everyone who mattered. Her throne was technically just a regular school bench, but the way she perched on it with perfect posture, surrounded by her loyal court of followers, transformed it into something approaching royalty. She held court there every morning before first period, dispensing judgment on fashion choices, weekend party invitations, and social climbing attempts with the casual cruelty that only teenagers could master. Standing slightly behind and to the right of Madison's bench was Tyler Nash, the kind of boy who had peaked at 17 and would spend the rest of his life trying to recapture the glory of his high school football career. Tyler was built like a linebacker because he was 1, with broad shoulders that filled out his leather jacket and hands that looked more comfortable gripping a football than holding a pencil. His relationship with Madison was the stuff of Riverside High legend, a power couple pairing that had dominated the school's social landscape for over 2 years. Tyler's appeal wasn't just his athletic ability or his rugged good looks. He possessed a particular brand of charm that made teachers overlook his academic shortcomings and made other students desperate for his approval. When Tyler Nash smiled at you in the hallway, it felt like being noticed by royalty. When he frowned in your direction, it was a social death sentence that could last for years. He used this power carelessly, the way someone might swat at flies, never considering the long-term damage his casual cruelty could inflict on his targets. Completing this triangle of teenage tyranny was Ashley Torres, Madison's best friend since elementary school and the unofficial social media minister of their operation. Ashley was the one who documented every moment of their lives with professional quality photos and carefully crafted captions that made their existence seem like an endless parade of perfect moments. Her phone was never more than 6 inches from her perfectly manicured fingertips, always ready to capture the next moment of either triumph or humiliation that would define someone's social standing. Ashley's role in their group dynamic was more complex than it appeared on the surface. While Madison provided the vision and Tyler supplied the muscle, Ashley served as the intelligence network that kept their empire running smoothly. She knew who was dating whom, who had failed which test, whose parents were getting divorced, and exactly which pieces of information could be weaponized when the time was right. Her Instagram account had over 3,000 followers, making her posts capable of reaching nearly the entire student body within hours. These three had noticed Chen exactly once during their shared time at Riverside High, and that moment had been enough to establish her place in their mental hierarchy. It had happened during sophomore year, when Riley had accidentally bumped into Madison while rushing to her locker between classes. The collision had been minor, barely enough to disturb Madison's perfectly arranged hair, but it had been enough to earn Riley a withering stare and a dismissive comment about watching where she was going. Since that day, Riley had existed on their periphery as nothing more than background scenery, the kind of unremarkable presence that filled the spaces between important people and important events. When they bothered to think about her at all, which was rarely, she registered as little more than that quiet Asian girl who always smelled faintly of restaurant food, and whose clothes looked like they came from discount stores rather than the boutiques that defined acceptable fashion at Riverside High. Riley's daily routine had been carefully calibrated to minimize contact with Madison's circle and their various satellites throughout the school's social constellation. She arrived at school early enough to avoid the morning hallway traffic, ate lunch in the library rather than risk the cafeteria's social battlefield, and lingered after classes to let the popular crowds clear out before making her way to her next destination. This strategy had served her well for 3 years, allowing her to maintain her invisible status while pursuing her secret training regimen. The irony of Riley's situation was completely lost on her classmates. While they saw a shy girl who worked at her family's restaurant and avoided social interaction, the truth was far more complex. Riley's apparent weakness was actually carefully controlled strength. Her silence was strategic rather than fearful, and her avoidance of conflict came not from cowardice, but from an understanding of consequences that her teenage peers couldn't comprehend. Every morning when Riley touched those hidden medals in her backpack, she wasn't just drawing strength from her grandmother's memory. She was reminding herself of the discipline that had made Chen legendary in Clearwater's underground fighting scene. Lin had taught her that true power came from choosing your battles carefully, that the strongest fighters were often the ones who looked least threatening, and that patience was more valuable than quick reflexes when the stakes were high enough. Riley's chemistry teacher, Mr. Thompson, was one of the few faculty members who had begun to suspect that there was more to his quiet student than met the eye. During lab sessions, he'd noticed that Riley possessed unusual focus and hand-eye coordination. When handling delicate equipment or performing precise measurements, she moved with a confidence and control that seemed at odds with her generally timid demeanor. Her lab reports were always meticulously detailed, written in handwriting that was surprisingly bold and confident compared to her barely audible speaking voice. The disconnect between Riley's potential and her performance puzzled several of her teachers. Mrs. Patterson had seen flashes of fierce intelligence in Riley's essay writing, particularly when the topics touched on themes of justice, perseverance, or overcoming adversity. Her English papers revealed a depth of thinking and emotional insight that suggested someone who had experienced more of life than the average teenager. But whenever Mrs. Patterson tried to draw Riley into class discussions or encourage her to share her perspectives, the girl would retreat into her shell like a startled turtle. Riley's mathematics teacher, Ms. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Rodriguez had similar observations about her students' unusual combination of capability and reticence. During problem-solving sessions, Riley could work through complex equations with remarkable speed and accuracy, but she never volunteered answers and seemed uncomfortable when called upon to explain her methods to the class. It was as if she possessed knowledge and skills that she was deliberately keeping hidden from her peers and teachers alike. The truth was that Riley's training at Phoenix Elite MMA Gym had taught her lessons that extended far beyond fighting techniques. Coach Elena had drilled into her students the importance of mental discipline, strategic thinking, and emotional control under pressure. These skills transferred directly to Riley's academic work, giving her advantages that her classmates couldn't understand or appreciate. She approached her studies with the same methodical focus that she brought to learning new, grappling techniques or perfecting her striking combinations. Riley's lunch periods were perhaps the most telling indicator of her true nature. While other students used this time for socializing, gossip, and social media consumption, Riley would find a quiet corner of the library and spend her time reading about sports psychology, nutrition, and combat strategy. She'd checked out every book the library had on martial arts history, biomechanics, and mental preparation for athletic competition. Occasionally, she would find herself absorbed in biographies of successful fighters, looking for patterns and strategies that she could apply to her own development. The librarian, Mrs. Kim, had become genuinely fond of Riley over the years, appreciating the girl's genuine love of learning and her respectful demeanor. Mrs. Kim had noticed that Riley's reading interests were unusually focused and sophisticated for a teenager, suggesting someone who was pursuing knowledge for specific, goal-oriented reasons rather than simple curiosity. When Riley asked for help finding resources on topics like sports medicine or competitive psychology, Mrs. Kim would go out of her way to locate additional materials from other libraries or online databases. As Riley sat in her chemistry class that morning, carefully positioning her backpack to protect the precious metals inside, she had no way of knowing that Madison Brooks was having one of her increasingly frequent bad days. Madison's father had been pressuring her about her grades. Her Instagram engagement rates had been declining slightly, and Tyler had been paying what she considered inappropriate attention to a sophomore girl who had recently transferred from California. These small irritations were building into the kind of explosive mood that typically resulted in someone else paying a heavy price for Madison's dissatisfaction. The stage was being set for a collision that would shatter Riley's carefully maintained invisibility and force her to choose between the quiet life she had built and the warrior legacy that flowed through her veins. Madison Brooks stood at her usual morning post near the main hallway intersection, but today something felt different. The carefully constructed world that revolved around her was showing hairline cracks that only she could see, tiny fissures in her social empire that threatened to undermine everything she had built over the past 3 years. Her phone buzzed, constantly with notifications, but the numbers weren't what they used to be. Her latest Instagram post about the weekend party at Tyler's house had only received 800 likes in 12 hours, a dramatic decline from her usual 1,000+ engagement that had her followers hanging on every perfectly curated moment of her existence. The decline wasn't dramatic enough for anyone else to notice, but Madison possessed the kind of social media awareness that could detect shifts in attention with the precision of a seismometer, measuring earthquake tremors. She knew that in the brutal mathematics of teenage popularity, even small decreases in engagement could signal the beginning of a catastrophic fall from grace. Other girls were posting more frequently, using better filters, and somehow managing to seem more effortlessly perfect than Madison had been able to achieve lately. Ashley Torres noticed her best friend's tension immediately. The way Madison's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly when she scrolled through her phone. The slight stiffness in her posture that suggested she was fighting to maintain her usual air of casual confidence. Ashley had been documenting Madison's life for so long that she could read her moods like a meteorologist tracking storm systems. Today's forecast called for thunderstorms with a high probability of someone getting completely destroyed in the social fallout. Tyler Nash was oblivious to the subtle atmospheric changes surrounding his girlfriend, focused instead on the highlights from Friday night's football game that were still playing on repeat in his mind. The team had won by 3 touchdowns against their biggest rivals, and Tyler had thrown for over 300 yards in what local sports reporters were calling one of the best performances in Riverside High history. College scouts had been in the stands taking notes, and Tyler was riding the kind of adrenaline high that made him feel invincible and slightly reckless. The combination of Madison's simmering frustration and Tyler's post-victory cockiness created a dangerous chemical reaction that had been building pressure since the weekend. When these two forces collided in the past, the results had been spectacular in their cruelty, leaving emotional casualties that sometimes took months to recover from the damage. Ashley had learned to recognize these warning signs and typically tried to redirect their energy towards safer targets. But today she was distracted by her own concerns about maintaining her social media presence. The first sign of trouble came during second period, when Madison spotted Jessica Martinez wearing a jacket that looked suspiciously similar to one Madison had posted about buying the previous week. The jacket itself wasn't particularly expensive or unique, but in Madison's current state of heightened sensitivity to any perceived challenge to her authority, Jessica's fashion choice felt like a deliberate provocation. Madison spent the entire class period composing and deleting text messages to Ashley about the supposed copying, each draft becoming more vicious than the last. By third period, word had spread through Madison's network that Jessica Martinez was apparently trying to steal Madison's style, an accusation that would have seemed absurd to anyone outside their social circle, but carried serious implications. Within it, Ashley had managed to gather intelligence suggesting that Jessica had actually bought the jacket weeks before Madison's purchase, but she chose not to share this information with her increasingly agitated best friend. Sometimes Ashley found it easier to let Madison's anger find its natural target, rather than risk becoming the target herself. During lunch period, Madison's mood had deteriorated to the point where even Tyler was beginning to notice the storm clouds gathering around his girlfriend. She picked at her salad without eating, responded to his attempts at conversation with single-word answers, and spent most of the meal scrolling through her phone with the kind of intense focus that suggested she was looking for reasons to be angry. When Tyler suggested they skip their afternoon classes to spend time at his house, Madison shot him a look that could have frozen fire. The breaking point came during the transition between fourth and fifth periods, when the hallways were packed with students rushing to beat the late bell. Madison was walking with her usual entourage when she spotted a group of sophomore girls near the science wing, laughing and taking selfies with obvious joy and excitement. Their happiness felt like a personal insult to Madison's current mood. A reminder that other people were experiencing the kind of carefree fun that seemed to be slipping away from her own carefully managed existence. One of the sophomore girls, a transfer student named Emma, who had arrived from California with an enviable tan and naturally effortless style, had been appearing in Tyler's Instagram likes with increasing frequency over the past few weeks. Madison had noticed every heart emoji Tyler had left on Emma's photos, each digital approval feeling like a small betrayal that accumulated into something approaching rage. When Emma waved cheerfully at Tyler as they passed in the hallway, Madison felt something snap inside her chest like a rubber band that had been stretched too far. Ashley recognized the danger signals immediately and tried to intervene by steering the conversation towards safer topics. But Madison was already locked onto her target with the kind of laser focus that had made her legendary for her ability to destroy social reputations. Tyler, still basking in his football glory and completely unaware of the emotional minefield he was navigating, made the catastrophic mistake of waving back at Emma with genuine enthusiasm. The explosion was immediate and devastating. Madison turned on Tyler with a fury that surprised even Ashley, unleashing 3 years of accumulated insecurities and fears about losing control in a torrent of accusations and threats that echoed through the hallway like a sonic boom. Other students stopped to stare as Madison's voice rose to levels that could be heard from 3 classrooms away, her carefully maintained perfect image cracking like a mask that had been struck by lightning. Tyler's response was predictably defensive and inflammatory, his post-game confidence transforming into the kind of masculine aggression that turned relationship arguments into public spectacles. Within minutes, their fight had attracted a crowd of onlookers who pulled out their phones to record the drama, sensing that they were witnessing the kind of social media gold that could generate thousands of views and endless gossip for weeks to come. Ashley found herself trapped between loyalty to her best friend and her instinct for self-preservation, knowing that being associated with this level of public drama could damage her own carefully cultivated image. She tried to play peacemaker, while simultaneously documenting the fight for her own social media purposes, a balancing act that required extraordinary social skills and questionable moral priorities. The argument escalated when Tyler, pushed beyond his limit by Madison's increasingly personal attacks, made a comment about her recent decline in social media engagement that hid every insecurity Madison had been trying to hide. The crowd around them grew larger as word spread through the school's gossip network that the king and queen of Riverside High were destroying each other in the most public way possible. Madison's response was swift and nuclear. She grabbed Tyler's phone and threatened to post embarrassing photos she had taken of him during their more intimate moments, a threat that crossed lines neither of them had previously approached. Tyler lunged for his phone, creating a brief physical altercation that brought teachers running from nearby classrooms and transformed their relationship drama into a disciplinary emergency that would require administrative intervention. As school security separated the couple and escorted them toward the principal's office, Madison was left with the kind of public humiliation that she had spent years inflicting on others, but had never experienced herself. The crowd dispersed slowly, buzzing with excitement about the fall of Riverside High's most powerful couple and speculating about who would fill the power vacuum left by their spectacular self-destruction. Ashley stood alone in the hallway, surrounded by the social wreckage of her best friend's empire and calculating how quickly she could distance herself from the damage. She knew that Madison would need a target for her rage when she returned from the principal's office, someone weaker and more vulnerable than Tyler, who could absorb the full force of her fury without fighting back effectively. Chen's name had never crossed Ashley's mind before this moment, but as she scrolled through her mental database of potential victims, the quiet girl who worked at the restaurant emerged as the perfect candidate for Madison's revenge. The administrative offices at Riverside High had witnessed countless teenage dramas over the years, but the explosion between Madison Brooks and Tyler Nash would be remembered as one of the most spectacular relationship disasters in school history. Principal Harrison sat behind his imposing oak desk, his weathered face showing the kind of exhaustion that came from dealing with 17-year-old emotions on a daily basis for over 2 decades. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as he delivered his verdict with the mechanical precision of someone who had given similar speeches hundreds of times before. Madison emerged from the principal's office 45 minutes later with a 3-day suspension and a mandatory anger management counseling session that felt like the ultimate humiliation for someone who had built her entire identity around being untouchable. Her perfect attendance record was shattered. Her college application would now require explanations about disciplinary actions. And worst of all, everyone in school had witnessed her complete loss of control. The carefully constructed image of effortless perfection that had taken years to build had crumbled in less than 10 minutes of public fury. Tyler's punishment was equally severe, with additional consequences related to his status as a student athlete that could potentially affect his college recruitment prospects. The football coach had been called into the meeting, and Tyler emerged from the office knowing that his starting position for the next game was in jeopardy. The golden boy who had never faced serious consequences for his actions was suddenly confronting the possibility that his choices could have lasting impacts on his future. Ashley Torres had spent the past hour strategically positioning herself in the hallway outside the administrative offices, documenting the steady stream of students who stopped to gossip about the fallen power couple while carefully crafting her own narrative about the events. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from classmates desperate for insider information about what had really happened between Madison and Tyler. Ashley found herself in the unusual position of being the primary source for the hottest gossip in school history, a role that came with both opportunities and dangers. When Madison finally walked out of Principal Harrison's office, her face was a mask of barely controlled rage that made even Ashley nervous about approaching her. Madison's perfectly applied makeup had been touched up in the bathroom, but nothing could hide the fury burning in her eyes or the way her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her designer purse. She looked like someone who had been stripped of everything that mattered to her and was desperately searching for a way to reclaim her power. The hallways of Riverside High felt different as Madison walked through them, the usual chorus of greetings and admiring glances replaced by whispered conversations and barely concealed stares. Students who had once competed for her attention now gave her a wide berth, sensing that being associated with her current drama could be social suicide. The invisible crown that had rested on Madison's head for 3 years had been knocked off, in full view of her subjects, and everyone was watching to see how she would respond to her fall from grace. Ashley caught up with her best friend near the chemistry wing, falling into step beside Madison with the kind of practiced loyalty that had defined their friendship since elementary school. But even Ashley could feel the dangerous energy radiating from Madison like heat from a furnace, the kind of barely contained fury that could explode in any direction without warning. Madison's need for revenge was palpable, a hunger that demanded immediate satisfaction regardless of the consequences. The afternoon classes had just ended when Madison spotted her target. Chen was walking alone through the nearly empty hallway, her worn backpack slung over one shoulder as she made her way toward the exit. To Madison's heightened senses, Riley represented everything that was wrong with her current situation. Here was someone who had never challenged Madison's authority, never competed for her boyfriend's attention, never posed any threat to her social standing. Yet somehow Riley's mere existence felt like an insult to Madison's wounded pride. Riley was completely unaware of the storm that was about to engulf her. She had spent the afternoon in the library as usual, avoiding the social chaos that had dominated the school day while working on her chemistry homework and reading about training techniques for mixed martial arts. Her mind was focused on the evening ahead, when she would slip away to Phoenix Elite MMA Gym for another session with Coach Elena Vasquez, continuing her secret preparation for an upcoming amateur tournament that could determine whether she was ready to compete at higher levels. The backpack that Riley carried was more than just a school bag. It was a mobile shrine to her grandmother's legacy, containing not only her textbooks and school supplies, but also the 3 bronze medals that Chen had won in underground fighting tournaments decades earlier. Riley had wrapped the medals in a piece of silk that had belonged to her grandmother, creating a hidden compartment in the bottom of the bag where they would be protected from the daily wear and tear of student life. Madison approached Riley with the predatory focus of a hunter who had finally spotted vulnerable prey after hours of unsuccessful stalking. Ashley followed at a safe distance, her phone already recording what she sensed would be content worthy of her social media empire. The hallway was largely empty, except for a few stragglers heading to after-school activities, creating the perfect environment for the kind of targeted harassment that Madison specialized in delivering. Riley sensed the danger before she saw it, the way someone might feel the atmospheric pressure change before a thunderstorm. She quickened her pace slightly, hoping to reach the exit before whatever was approaching could catch up with her. But Madison was operating on pure adrenaline and fury, moving with the kind of determined speed that came from having nothing left to lose and everything to prove. The first contact was seemingly accidental. Madison bumped into Riley near the Fendi intersection of 2 hallways, causing Riley to stumble slightly and drop her backpack. The bag hit the floor with a soft thud, and Riley immediately knelt to retrieve it, her protective instincts automatically engaging to shield her grandmother's medals from any potential damage. This moment of vulnerability was exactly what Madison had been waiting for. Madison's voice cut through the quiet hallway like a blade, sharp and deliberately loud enough to attract attention from anyone within hearing range. She began with a series of calculated insults about Riley's appearance, her family's restaurant, and her obvious poverty compared to the wealthy students who dominated Riverside High's social hierarchy. Each word was chosen for maximum impact, designed to humiliate and demoralize with surgical precision. Riley tried to maintain her usual strategy of silent endurance, gathering her belongings quickly while avoiding eye contact with her tormentor. But Madison was not in the mood to accept passive resistance. The suspension had stripped away her usual sense of invulnerability, and she needed to reassert her dominance through the complete destruction of someone who couldn't fight back effectively. The escalation happened with terrifying speed. Madison grabbed Riley's backpack before she could secure the zipper, yanking it away with enough force to tear the worn fabric along one of the seams. Textbooks and school supplies scattered across the hallway floor, but that wasn't enough to satisfy Madison's hunger for destruction. She shook the bag violently, searching for something that would cause maximum emotional damage to her victim. The silk-wrapped bundle containing Chen's medals fell out of the hidden compartment and hit the floor with a metallic clink that seemed to echo through the hallway like a gunshot. Riley's protective instincts exploded into action as she lunged forward to shield her grandmother's treasures, but Madison was faster and more aggressive. She kicked the bundle across the floor, sending the medals skittering in different directions. As the silk wrapping came undone, Ashley captured every moment on her phone, sensing that she was documenting something that would generate massive social media engagement, while completely missing the deeper significance of what was being destroyed. To her, the medals looked like cheap costume jewelry or participation trophies from some meaningless childhood activity. She had no way of understanding that she was watching the desecration of a family legacy that connected Riley to generations of warrior women who had fought for respect and survival. Madison picked up one of the bronze medals and examined it with mock curiosity, reading the faded inscription about the 1987 Underground Women's Fighting Championship of Clearwater. Her laughter was cruel and calculating as she announced to Ashley and the small crowd that had begun to gather that Riley's family apparently collected fake awards to make themselves feel important. The historical significance of underground Women's fighting was completely lost on Madison, who saw only an opportunity to inflict maximum humiliation on her chosen victim. The final act of destruction came when Madison deliberately dropped the metal and stepped on it with her designer heel, the bronze surface cracking under the pressure while she maintained eye contact with Riley. The sound of the metal breaking was quiet, barely audible above the ambient noise of the school, but to Riley it was as loud as thunder. Something inside her chest felt like it was tearing apart as she watched decades of family history being crushed under the foot of someone who understood nothing about honor, legacy, or the price that had been paid for those simple bronze discs. Riley knelt on the cold hallway floor, gathering the pieces of her shattered heritage while Madison and Ashley continued their performance for the growing audience of onlookers. The humiliation was complete and public, documented for social media, posterity, and guaranteed to follow Riley through the digital eternity of teenage social networks. But something else was happening beneath the surface of Riley's apparent defeat, a transformation that began in the deepest parts of her DNA, where Chen's fighting spirit had been waiting for exactly this moment to emerge. The quiet girl who had spent 3 years perfecting the art of invisibility was about to discover that some lines, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. The bronze medals lying broken on the hallway floor represented more than just her grandmother's victories. They were symbols of a family tradition that demanded justice, and Chen was about to honor that tradition in ways that Madison Brooks could never have imagined. The silence that followed the destruction of Chen's medal stretched across the hallway like the moment before lightning strikes. Riley knelt on the cold linoleum floor, her trembling fingers gathering the broken pieces of bronze and twisted metal that had once represented her grandmother's legendary victories in Clearwater's underground fighting circuit. Each fragment she collected felt heavier than it should have, weighted with decades of family history and the accumulated pain of 3 years of relentless torment that had finally reached its breaking point. Madison Brooks stood above Riley with the satisfied expression of someone who believed she had just reclaimed her position at the top of Riverside High's social hierarchy through the complete destruction of an innocent victim. The designer heel that had crushed the metal still gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and Madison made no effort to step away from the scattered remnants of Riley's heritage. Ashley Torres continued recording with her phone, capturing what she assumed would be the final moments of Riley's humiliation for her social media empire, completely unaware that she was about to document something far more extraordinary than teenage bullying. The small crowd of onlookers had grown larger as word spread through the school's gossip network that Madison Brooks was having another explosive moment. Students pulled out their phones and whispered among themselves, treating the destruction of Riley's possessions like entertainment rather than recognizing the deep personal violation that was taking place. Tyler Nash had appeared at the edge of the crowd, drawn by the commotion and still riding the aggressive energy from his earlier confrontation with Madison in the principal's office. Riley's breathing became deeper and more controlled as she remained crouched on the floor, her mind automatically shifting into the mental state that Coach Elena Vasquez had drilled into her during thousands of hours of training at Phoenix Elite MMA Gym. The transformation was subtle at first, visible only in the way her shoulders squared and her spine straightened as she rose slowly to her feet. The broken pieces of her grandmother's medals were clutched tightly in her left hand, while her right hand hung loose and ready at her side. Madison noticed the change in Riley's posture and mistook it for defiance that needed to be crushed more thoroughly. She stepped closer to Riley, invading her personal space with the aggressive confidence of someone who had never faced serious consequences for her actions. Madison's voice rose as she launched into another verbal assault, this time making personal attacks about Riley's family and their restaurant that crossed lines even she had never approached before. The words were designed to break Riley's spirit completely, to reduce her to tears and ensure that she would never again dare to exist in Madison's world. Ashley moved closer with her phone, sensing that Madison was building towards something spectacular that would generate massive social media engagement. Tyler began pushing through the crowd to get a better view, his own anger from the earlier suspension making him eager to watch someone else suffer the kind of humiliation he had just experienced. The hallway filled with the electric tension that comes before violence, though none of the spectators expected that violence to come from the quiet girl who had been their entertainment for the past several minutes. The breaking point came when Madison reached out and slapped Riley across the face with enough force to snap her head to the side. The sound echoed through the hallway like a gunshot, and for a moment everything seemed frozen in time. Riley's cheek burned from the impact, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional devastation of watching her grandmother's legacy destroyed. Something deep inside her chest felt like it was tearing apart, but it wasn't weakness. Breaking free, it was strength. Riley turned her head back toward Madison with movements that were fluid and controlled, her dark eyes meeting Madison's blue ones with an intensity that made the popular girl take an involuntary step backward. When Riley spoke, her voice was quiet but carried a quality that cut through the ambient noise of the hallway like a blade through silk. The words came from somewhere deeper than anger, from a place where Lin Chun's fighting spirit had been waiting for 17 years to emerge. Madison raised her hand to strike Riley again, confident that she could continue the assault without any meaningful resistance. But when her palm moved toward Riley's face, something impossible happened. Riley's right hand snapped up with lightning speed, catching Madison's wrist in a grip that stopped the slap cold and held it suspended in midair. The crowd gasped as Madison's expression shifted from arrogant confidence to genuine shock, then to something approaching fear as she realized she couldn't pull her arm free from Riley's grasp. Tyler Nash pushed forward through the crowd, his protective instincts toward Madison overriding his common sense as he moved to intervene in what he assumed would be a brief scuffle between girls. He was built like the linebacker he was, with shoulders that filled doorways and hands that had been throwing footballs since elementary school. In Tyler's mind, separating two fighting girls would be simple work that would restore order and probably earn him points with Madison despite their earlier conflict. Riley released Madison's wrist and turned to face Tyler as he approached, her movements flowing like water as she shifted into a fighting stance that had been drilled into her muscle memory through years of rigorous training. Coach Elena had taught her that the most dangerous opponents were often the ones who underestimated her, and Tyler Nash was about to become a textbook example of that principle. His size and strength meant nothing against someone who understood leverage, timing, and the precise application of force to vulnerable targets. Tyler reached out to grab Riley's shoulders, intending to hold her in place while Madison regained her composure and figured out how to reassert control over the situation. His movements were telegraphed and clumsy compared to the sophisticated grappling techniques that Riley had been mastering for the past 3 years. When his hands made contact with her shoulders, Riley immediately dropped her center of gravity and pivoted, using Tyler's forward momentum against him in a textbook hip toss that sent him flying over her shoulder and crashing into the lockers with a metallic bang that reverberated through the hallway. The crowd erupted in shocked gasps and scattered applause as Tyler slumped against the lockers, temporarily stunned by the impact and completely bewildered by what had just happened to him. Ashley's phone captured every moment as she tried to process the fact that the quiet restaurant girl had just thrown the starting linebacker across the hallway like he weighed nothing. Madison stared in disbelief, her perfect world suddenly feeling unstable as the natural order she had always taken for granted began crumbling around her. Riley stood in the center of the hallway, her breathing steady and controlled despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The broken pieces of her grandmother's medals were still clutched in her left hand, but her right hand remained loose and ready as she scanned the crowd for additional threats. 3 years of secret training had prepared her for exactly this moment, when patience and discipline would give way to controlled violence in defense of everything she held sacred. Madison recovered from her shock quickly, her rage returning with even greater intensity as she realized that her carefully constructed social dominance was being challenged by someone she had always considered beneath her notice. She lunged at Riley with wild swings that showed more anger than technique, her designer nails aimed at Riley's face with the kind of desperate fury that comes from watching your world collapse in real time. Madison had never been in a real fight before, and her attacks were driven by emotion rather than strategy or skill. Riley moved like she was dancing, slipping Madison's wild swings with minimal effort while positioning herself for a counterattack that would end the confrontation quickly and decisively. Coach Alina had taught her that the most effective fighters were the ones who could remain calm under pressure, who could see opportunities in their opponent's mistakes and capitalize on them with surgical precision. Madison's emotional state made her predictable, and Riley could read her intentions several moves ahead. When Madison committed to a particularly wild swing, Riley stepped inside her guard and delivered a perfectly timed uppercut that connected with Madison's solar plexus, driving the air from her lungs and doubling her over in gasping agony. The punch was controlled and precise, designed to incapacitate rather than cause permanent damage, but the effect was immediate and dramatic. Madison dropped to her knees, clutching her stomach and struggling to breathe while her perfectly styled hair fell across her face in disheveled strands. Ashley backed away from the confrontation, her phone still recording but her confidence shaken as she watched her best friend being systematically dismantled by someone they had both dismissed as harmless. The social media content she was capturing was unlike anything she had ever posted before, and she wasn't sure whether documenting Madison's defeat would help or hurt her own social standing. The crowd around them had grown larger and more excited, with students pulling out their phones to record what was quickly becoming the most talked about fight in Riverside High history. Tyler struggled to his feet, his pride wounded more than his body as he processed the humiliation of being thrown around by someone half his size. His football training had taught him to respond to physical challenges with increased aggression, and he couldn't accept that a quiet girl had gotten the better of him in front of half the school. Tyler's second attempt to grab Riley was more focused and determined, driven by the kind of masculine ego that couldn't tolerate being beaten by someone he considered weaker. Riley saw Tyler coming and shifted her stance slightly, her weight balanced on the balls of her feet as she prepared to demonstrate the difference between athletic ability and martial arts expertise. When Tyler reached for her again, she caught his wrist and stepped under his arm, using his own momentum to guide him into a shoulder throw that was even more spectacular than her first technique. Tyler flew through the air and landed hard on his back, the impact driving the breath from his lungs and leaving him staring up at the ceiling lights with a dazed expression. The hallway fell silent except for the sounds of Madison's labored breathing and Tyler's groans as he tried to recover from his second trip to the floor. Riley stood between them, her small frame somehow commanding the entire space as she surveyed the aftermath of her defensive actions. The broken pieces of her grandmother's medals were still in her left hand, but they no longer felt like symbols of loss. They had become talismans of power, connecting her to Lin Chen's warrior spirit in ways that transcended the physical damage Madison had inflicted. Ashley lowered her phone, finally understanding that she had been documenting something far more significant than typical teenage drama. The quiet girl who worked at the Chinese restaurant had just defeated the two most physically imposing members of Riverside High's social elite with techniques that looked like they belonged in professional fighting rather than high school hallways. Ashley's social media instincts told her that this footage would go viral within hours, but she was beginning to realize that viral fame might not be worth the consequences of being associated with Madison's downfall. Mrs. Patterson emerged from her classroom at the sound of the commotion, followed by several other teachers who had been alerted by the noise and the growing crowd of students. The scene that greeted them was unlike anything they had witnessed in decades of education, with two of the school's most prominent students lying on the floor while a girl known for her quiet demeanor stood over them with the calm confidence of someone who had just completed a routine task. Riley's breathing remained steady and controlled as she surveyed the crowd of onlookers, her dark eyes meeting the stares of classmates who were seeing her clearly for the first time in 3 years. The transformation was complete and irreversible. Her carefully maintained invisibility shattered along with Madison's medals and Tyler's ego. When she spoke, her voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had just proven that strength came in forms that couldn't be measured by social status or physical intimidation. The authorities arrived quickly, but their questions were answered by dozens of student witnesses who had recorded the entire confrontation on their phones. The evidence was overwhelming and one-sided, showing Madison initiating the conflict by destroying Riley's possessions and Tyler intervening with physical aggression that Riley had defended against with remarkable skill and restraint. Principal Harrison reviewed the footage with the kind of professional detachment that comes from dealing with teenage conflicts for over 2 decades. But even he was impressed by Riley's demonstration of martial arts expertise. Riley's secret was no longer secret, but she felt lighter rather than burdened as she walked toward the exit of Riverside High for what might be the last time as an invisible student. The broken pieces of her grandmother's medals were carefully wrapped in tissues and placed in her jacket pocket, where they would eventually be repaired and restored to their place of honor in her family's history. The physical damage could be fixed, but the emotional transformation was permanent and profound. Coach Elena Vasquez received a phone call that evening from Riley's uncle Danny, who had heard about the incident through the extensive network of social media posts that documented every moment of the confrontation. Elena listened to the story with growing pride, understanding that her student had finally connected with the warrior spirit that had been developing through years of disciplined training. The shy girl who had walked into Phoenix Elite MMA Gym 3 years earlier had become exactly what Elena had always known she could be. The following morning, Riley arrived at school to find her social status completely transformed. Students who had never acknowledged her existence now watched her with mixtures of respect, fear, and curiosity. The footage of her defeating Madison and Tyler had spread far beyond Riverside High, attracting attention from local news outlets and martial arts communities throughout Arizona. Chen was no longer invisible, and she would never be invisible again. Madison Brooks did not return to school that week, her family choosing to transfer her to a private institution where her social media humiliation might be less visible to her daily peer group. Tyler Nash faced suspension from the football team and mandatory counseling sessions that would force him to confront the consequences of his aggressive behavior. Ashley Torres deleted most of the footage she had recorded, understanding that being associated with the losing side of such a spectacular defeat could damage her own social media empire beyond repair. Riley opened her locker that morning to find dozens of notes and messages from classmates who wanted to know more about her martial arts background, her training regimen, and her plans for competition. Several girls who had been victims of Madison's bullying in the past approached Riley with stories of their own experiences and gratitude for someone finally standing up to the school's most notorious tormentors. The quiet girl who had eaten lunch alone in the library for 3 years suddenly found herself surrounded by potential friends and allies. The bronze medals were repaired by a local metalworker who specialized in restoration projects, and they returned to their place of honor in Riley's backpack with new significance attached to their battered surfaces. Chen's legacy had been tested in the crucible of modern conflict and had emerged stronger than ever, proof that warrior spirit could transcend generations and manifest when justice demanded action. Riley wore the medals to her next tournament. At Phoenix Elite MMA Gym, where she won her division with techniques that honored both her grandmother's memory and her own evolving identity as a fighter. The story of the shy girl who revealed herself to be a martial arts champion spread throughout Clearwater and beyond, inspiring other young people who felt powerless in the face of bullying and social intimidation. Riley Chen became a symbol of hidden strength and the importance of standing up for what matters most, regardless of the social consequences. Her transformation from invisible victim to visible warrior was complete, but it was also just the beginning of a journey that would take her far beyond the hallways of Riverside High School. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.